We are starting the second day of our conference, and now we are going to talk about regional development of the Arctic zone of Russia. We'll talk about regional experience and economic growth area. While the presenters are getting ready, I'm going to say that the regions in the Arctic are very different. They are not uh, like one another, and still there are attempts to do something for the Arctic zone of Russia and find some common approaches. Whether or not this is a proper approach, whether or not this is the right thing to do, is what we're going to discuss. Are regions really growth points? Are they self-sufficient? Well, I am going to pass the floor to Alexander Schimberg, who is the editor-in-chief of the Go Arctic Information Portal. Now that my colleague has done the introduction, I can do my presentation, and I will also say that for those who do not live in the Arctic, this is an area that looks pretty much the same everywhere, which it is not. One way or another, in all Arctic areas, there are some things that they have in common. Not a lot of commonalities, but still a few. In the beginning, I want to talk about those things that different parts of the Arctic share. Igor has rightly stated that what they have in common is that they're all in the north. Everything else is different between them. Our state, our country, in the last 10 years has been paying a lot of attention to the Arctic regions. And we have witnessed a lot of changes. There have been new laws passed, and one of the most important laws, to my opinion, is the strategy for the Arctic zone development 2030. This is not a very new document, and now we are in the phase of implementation. So let us quickly look at different Arctic areas. If we could have my PowerPoint presentation, it would be quite good. Let's go to my second slide. Murmansk region comes first in the strategy, so I'm not going to change the order. I have not included all the items in the strategy, just a few things. In every region, transportation is a big issue. Murmansk is a big transportation hub. Everyone knows that, and that has been the case all along. Now there's a lot of talk about construction of new railroad branches and new port facilities, new docks, and many things. Murmansk Airport has also seen very many changes. There's been some talk about improvements in airport of Apatite, but it's not a part of the strategy plan. We know about some plans that have been launched by large corporations like Novatek that is producing natural gas offshore. They have a lot of different operations, and they have big plans for production in Kola Peninsula. Fisheries, tourism, those are other big industries. In fact, every Arctic region has some tourism industry. Some have oil and gas, some have gold production, diamond production. Natural resources can be found pretty much everywhere. In the government strategy, transport is a big priority because it's essential that every region and every city should have convenient accessibility. There is a big unit on tourism, and there's usually a big unit on natural resources production in every part of the Arctic. There's been different attitudes of the local people, many different opinions that we can find in the press. In the transport section, you can see the plans to develop Indigaport, a railway between Sosnogorsk and Elgirka. Now, Chukovka transport, Port Pivac, Kolyma Anadyr Railway, production of mineral resources, and development of tourism clusters. Well, tourism is a big notion, and they have different types of tourism in different parts of the Arctic. Some areas are really suitable for those who like extreme tourism. Others offer more conventional type of recreation. Now, Yamalo-Nenetsk Autonomous Area, the transport section includes development of Sabeta port and a construction of a new railway branch. They are witnessing strong development of oil and gas infrastructure, which includes transportation and processing. They also have some developments in the tourism industry. Next area is not fully in the Arctic zone, Karelia. In the transport chapter, they have plans to upgrade Belmor-Baltijsk Canal. This is definitely a big priority. However, it's not very clear who is going to do this work and what kind of funding will be available for that. But this is included in this strategy. Development of data centers is another priority that has been identified for this part of the country. This area has a strong timber industry and fishery, and of course tourism. Komi Republic, they also have plans to build new railways. They are planning to improve their airports. They have several factory cities, cities with one big company that gives employment to most residents. This is rather sad. Those types of cities are always difficult to manage. They have big plans for natural resources production and some plans for tourism. Sakha Republic, they are planning to do some improvements in the regional rivers to make them more convenient for shipping. They have plans for the development of tourism as well. Next area, Krasnoyarsk region. They have two ports, Dixon and Dudinka, that need modernization. And the same can be said about their airports. One airport at Khatanga needs to be upgraded. They have plans to develop their natural resources production, metals, diamonds, other things. Now, Archangel area. The port of Archangel is a very important transport node. It provides connectivity to all of the northwest of Russia. They have big plans for development of fisheries and mineral resources production. They also have big plans for tourism development. However, today the numbers of tourists are not very high. There are a lot of national parks and reserves in the area, and we don't really want to see crowds of people going there, because this would not be good for the local environment. Let's look at the governance in the Arctic. The country is so big that there are authorities that are responsible for several parts of the Arctic part of Russia. There are offices of the president's representatives in different regions. As you can see in this chart, there are several units into which the Arctic area is developed. And you can see the names of the representatives that are responsible for different parts. Tatiana Golikova, Yuri Borisov, Victoria Abramchenko, and Yuri Trutnev. The authorities are trying to keep a close eye on the Arctic. Those people have a lot of different responsibilities, and I wonder how they manage to cover so many different tasks and work with so many papers and documents. An interesting thought. It just tells me that we don't have one Arctic region in the government vision. There are different parts and pieces. These regions have some commonalities, and they can join their efforts in some areas to do things together. We lost sound. The sound is back. St. Petersburg actually considers itself to be a part of the Arctic as well. We need someone who really would be responsible for all of the Arctic, or we should leave them alone and let them go along their path and take care of their own strategies. So that is the high-level view of the situation. At the end, I would like to say a few words about the private sector. There are other documents besides this strategy. There is a strategy for development of entrepreneurship. It's a law, and it has been around for about a year. We do not have an even distribution of companies in all parts of the Arctic. Most of them work in Murmansk. Murmansk is easy to get to. The climate is not as rough as in other parts of the Arctic, like here. Therefore, we see more businesses there, and that has always been the case. In this chart, I said that there are still issues that have not been resolved. There are so-called northern guarantees that have been offered to the businesses that work in the north of the country. Uh, Employers have extra responsibilities compared to their peers working in other parts of the country. On the one hand, it makes sense, but then again, we need to see development of businesses so that people can live more comfortably. We need to have grocery stores and barber shops and all common conveniences. Such things have to be addressed at a local level. The government does not have to take care of all those little things. They should really run on their own. Another thought that I wanted to share with you, they have launched the Arctic Hectare program as of August 1. It's too early to expect any results and to make any conclusions. I will just say that this is an interesting project, an interesting concept, and we'll see how things work out. We know that they have done a similar thing in the far east of Russia, so it remains to be seen how successful it's going to work in the Arctic region. That's all I have, and we are going to make time for Q&A later after we take all other presentations. Now, I'm passing the floor to Nadezhda Zamyatina, who is the Deputy Director of the autonomous nonprofit organization Institute of Regional Consulting. Over to you, Nadezhda. While they are turning on my presentation, I will say a few introductory words. 20 years ago, when I was a postgraduate student, I participated in a similar event where we talked about development of the frontier areas, and that was an event in Copenhagen. And interestingly, I see that we have a representative from the university that hosted that event 20 years ago here at today's conference. In the context of our conference, I want to say that this meeting 20 years later is an illustration of the fact that the Arctic is really a networking region. The Arctic brings people together more than any other region. If we held a conference in Tambov region, it would be entirely different, and there would be less likelihood of holding such a conference. All Arctic areas are somewhat connected, like there are areas in other parts of the world that have common features. We all live next to the Arctic Ocean, and we have similar cultural issues. We face similar threats. We know about military tensions. There are quite a lot of military installations and army bases all around the Arctic. We are thinking about problems and opportunities. I would like to talk about Arctic cities in my presentation. Arctic cities are somewhat odd. Ideally, people should not be building cities in such areas. A normal city should have good connectivity to other cities to support trade and other operations. In the Arctic, cities are different. They look like islands of civilization in the middle of nowhere. According to Russian Statistics Authority, 89% of Arctic residents live in cities, and that is similar to what we see in other parts of the world. Although in Canada and in Greenland there are fewer city residents. In the Russian Arctic, we have most residents living in cities, but the economy is not really the city type economy. Look at the print screen from the investment portal of Russian Federation. The Arctic accounts for 83% of natural gas production, and naturally, that is not happening in cities. So people live in cities, but the businesses work outside of cities. That is an interesting situation. If you look at the role of cities in the economic life of regions, they account for about 40% of production. Most of the investment takes place outside of cities. And that brings about a question. Why do we have those cities? I'm going to give you my answer later. I have been asked to make a few comments about the city of Vorkuta and talk about the future of the Arctic cities. The challenges that Arctic cities are facing have to do with the Arctic climate. This pyramid on the right-hand side was architect Shipkov's project for the Arctic. It has never materialized. The main challenge is climate. That is the common belief. And we can say that people have technologies. This round residential building on the right-hand side is a demonstration of the innovative nature of some of local architecture. They have developed such facades which are more capable to keep those houses warm, and they better withstand high wind situations. People can live in the Arctic, they can stay warm, they can keep their cars warm. All those problems are addressable. This is a picture that I have found in one of the social networks. At many places, people can get a free cup of tea or coffee to keep people warm. People care for each other and they try to help and support each other. There are some things that are hard to handle, though. Arctic cities see strong variations in the number of residents. Murmansk has lost a lot of people, about 1/4 of its residents. It used to have 400,000 residents. Now it's 300,000 residents. Some cities are growing. This is true about Solikard, and that also is a challenge. Those cities have very expensive housing. And when housing is expensive, it's very difficult to bring people in. That translates into a very high load for municipalities. They find it difficult to bring in people from other parts of the country. This is another city, Khanty-Mansiysk. You can see these converted garages. That is happening because of lack of proper housing. Those houses that lose people also find it difficult. There are serious gaps in city fabric. There are districts that are underpopulated. They have various facilities that have been built back in the Soviet time, and we see that the costs associated with infrastructure are growing exponentially.
The third problem or the third challenge that these cities face is okay, this is an old photo from Norilsk. It looks different now, but I like this photo because this photo shows, on the one hand, it's beautiful. On the other hand, this is a typical situation of solitude or loneliness. It's just one building in the middle of nowhere. You need to have suburbs in Arctic territories. So if we go to urban science and ask this question of why we need cities in Arctic territories, number one, the so-called crystallar grid, we need a support network for companies operating in those territories. We need services, which is what we're lacking. This photo is from the town of Noyabrsk. This shopping center has been shut down. By the way, small businesses suffered more in Arctic territories during the lockdown than on the average throughout the rest of Russia. So this created additional problems for the business. Number two, providing services and goods for remote consumers. We're talking primarily about raw material industries. This is a typical problem for mono towns, company towns. Yes, there are certain benefits for the residents of Arctic territories. Okay, the processing industry is a rare exception. Initial processing facilities like in Norilsk and Monchegorsk, platinum, other precious metals, and then, for example, in Severodvinsk, the shipyard that builds military vessels, or Murmansk, the shipyard that will produce modules for the LNG plant. That's what can be manufactured in the Arctic. It's a very limited list. So you have this problem of mono towns, company towns, and this is a problem for urban development. I quote some researchers like Jacobson in my book on this matter. It's really hard to develop the economy in these Arctic cities. They're too small, too far away from each other. So, as a result, you can see this graffiti. This is a picture I took in Vorkuta. The graffiti says, "Tear me down." I often have to answer this question of why we need Arctic towns. And we did a special study on this matter. Arctic towns, even though they don't generate a lot of the regional product, but the Arctic economy in general works as a kind of engine with two pistons. The economy in those Arctic territories cannot operate without cities. Cities are like drivers of economic development, and I will use the rest of my presentation to show this. Cargoes go primarily through cities. Novy Urengoy turned out to be the biggest city in the Arctic in terms of passenger flow. Its population is very low, but it has very high traffic with a lot of people going through Novy Urengoy to oil fields. The same goes for Norilsk. So they're centers of transport, centers of logistics. Next, cities provide Arctic companies with the services they need, like oil services. About 20% of oil services in the Arctic zone are provided by local service companies. For example, here in Yamal-Nenets district, and initial processing facilities. Okay, next. Supply services, warehousing, power generation. Even if companies operate far from those cities, they still need this kind of support from the cities. We also looked at the dairy production. Surprisingly, a lot of dairy products are produced in cities in Arctic territories. It has to be closer to the people who consume those products. So there are animal farms within cities in those territories. Salihard is an exception. Here are some of the things I just mentioned. You see, Novy Urengoy has the highest passenger traffic because it services nearby oil and gas fields. When the development of the Arctic started in the 19th century, they had to build a town close to every oil or gas field. This is what they do, like, for example, in Alaska with the Fairbanks, where the gold rush took place. It was the same in Russia. We had Kirovsk or Norilsk, close to mining places. And then in the 20th century, there were only a few exceptions, but basically building a new town for every deposit, for every field was abandoned. This idea was abandoned with a few exceptions in Canada, for example. So the blue circles you can see on the map in the middle is where most of minerals are extracted in the Nenets district and in Chukotka. This is where mining is located. Green circles or green ovals show the areas where population is concentrated. Actually, we have two types of the Arctic. One with the permanent residents, and another one that's workers like oilers who work by shifts. They come and go. They come work for a few weeks and then they leave. They're not permanent residents. We obtained some data regarding warehouses for fuels based on helicopter pads and runways. And this way we can tell where most of exploration takes place, where most of the product is manufactured, is produced, but they don't operate autonomously. They're supplied by nearby cities. And most importantly, Cities are where what I call veto industries are. For example, we all know that the president said that the Northern Sea route should be able to transport 80 million tons within the next 2 years, and the economy is going to develop. But you do need meteorological stations, and that's what Arkhangelsk does. If there is no Arkhangelsk, if there is no city, if there is no meteorological service there, the Northern Sea route won't be able to operate. Then next, you have geological stations. They're also absolutely necessary. You can't perform geological studies from Moscow or St. Petersburg. You need a base closer to the area. Third, you need IT and communication services. This is absolutely necessary. Uh, Next, you need veterinary services. You need research facilities. So there are a number of industries, a number of areas that are absolutely necessary for companies to operate, for them to generate revenue, for mining companies. Like I said, this is like an engine with two pistons. Uh, uh, First, there is a city, then there is a mining company, and then the city keeps supporting and supplying those mining operations. Okay, one more point. You have the statement, people are born in cities and then they die in the tundra. So people who live in northern territories are born primarily in cities and then they move. So cities play an important role in reproduction. That's where people are born. Okay, I'm running out of time here. So speaking of Arctic development, I would consider this not as a region developing, but I like this model that I mentioned, this being an engine with the two pistons. Uh, I will very briefly go over a report I gave recently. If you take the entire population of the Arctic, half of the cities are actually university cities, not mining cities. This means, this is very important, this means that cities provide a scientific base. Um, Unfortunately, you don't have large cities like Novi Urengoy close to fields. So Arctic cities, like I said, they provide a strong, very powerful scientific base for the mining industry in the Arctic. In the Soviet years, 4% of the population were geologists. And this is really important. It may sound like a paradox, but Arctic cities are really, they're really uh, they're really about science. If we take a look at this table, you may see that university towns account for 1/3 of the urban population in the Arctic. Fast growing cities. Salehard, this is not a university town yet, but it's a local capital. Somewhat similar to Whitehorse or Yellowknife in Canada. This kind of cities make sense in the Arctic, but cities that don't have this strong research component, like Sunja, for a variety of reasons, unfortunately, don't contain this necessary element. And even Vorkuta, it did have some valuable research center. Norilsk has its own university. So the first cities in the Arctic were more urban, so to speak, than those that appeared later. Okay, to conclude, uh, cities in the Arctic are very different from ordinary cities. They're different because they have to adapt to Arctic conditions, difficult climate conditions. I wrote this statement. It's like a safe box for personnel. Cities help retain valuable population, valuable people who have adapted to Arctic conditions. Bringing in new personnel will be very costly. It's much better to use people who have already adapted to Arctic conditions. So cities work like storage units for personnel, for labor. So we often tend to forget, we talk about the Arctic as mining opportunities, Yamala, LNG, etc. But at the bottom, you have another sector of the Arctic, academic cities. Thank you. Thanks. Okay. We started with some general statements, and let's now go specific. Let's now talk specifically about Yamal. We have Roman Grabarev, Deputy Head of the Strategic Planning Office. The floor is yours. Welcome to Salihard. Happy to see all of you here. Mr. Schimberg was right when he talked about the Arctic zone. He talked about the strategy, and we all helped design this strategy. And we worked simultaneously on the general strategy for the Arctic and for the strategy specifically for our district. And our priorities were incorporated into the general strategy. In June of this year, we continued working on the strategy for 2 years. And we worked with a large number of the companies. You can see some of them listed here. You have some oil companies, McKinsey, Moscow University, etc. We looked at the best practices internationally and also domestically. Our strategy addresses the key challenges that the region faces. While working on the strategy, we identified the key trends, like, for example, mining operations are gradually moving further up to the north. We also saw another trend that most people working at those enterprises will not reside in the Arctic permanently. Instead, they will come and go. The second challenge, our economy in our region depends on the oil and gas industry too much. The situation with oil affects our budgeting, our revenue. We very much depend on oil prices, and this affects our ability to address social challenges. The third key challenge, climate change, global warming. Within the next 30 years, the ground level will drop by 10 to 30 centimeters. This may undermine buildings, infrastructure, and you can see here at the bottom our estimate for potential damage that this might cause. So we introduced new safety standards for our buildings and established monitoring systems to prevent damage to housing. Number four, the fourth challenge is the shortage of skilled personnel, because our region has difficulty providing high living standards in this competition for human capital. So it's not enough to offer high salaries. We should also develop what we call social infrastructure, provide people living and working here with better services. Our strategy includes what we plan to do to develop our social infrastructure. So based on this, we identified five priorities for our development. So number one, we want to improve living standards, create comfortable conditions for living, develop social infrastructure, education, and culture. Number two, sustainable economic growth, developing business, supporting entrepreneurs, export operations, etc. Number three, rational mining, the use of natural resources, adapting to climate change, recultivation of land, pollution prevention, and creating an effective waste treatment system. Number four, supporting indigenous peoples, supporting traditional economic activities, preserving the heritage of local indigenous peoples, and improving education and healthcare services for them. Number five, effective governance. All administrative decisions will be more transparent. We'll establish a transparent information system for all administrative and governance activities. We'll have clear priorities in constant dialogue with business and civil society. Currently, our region is a leader in the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation. 50% of the gross regional product is generated in our district in Yamal-Nenets, and 70% of all the investment in the Arctic zone goes to the Yamal-Nenets district. This is because the oil and gas industry develops quite vigorously in our region. It's the backbone of our regional economy. We have three key areas for developing this economy. We want to develop new oil and gas fields, also creating transport infrastructure. We want to develop the LNG project on the Yamal Peninsula, and also we plan to develop the Nadimpur Taz field. These three areas that I mentioned will allow us to achieve the innovative, optimistic scenario, which means we will increase the overall volume of gas production by 4.4 trillion cubic meters, oil production by 389 million tons, and gas condensate by 155 million tons. Another economic development driver in the next 15 to 20 years will be infrastructure development, especially our transport project. This will reduce costs for local industries, improve connectivity and accessibility of our towns. We plan to build 378 kilometers of roads in our district. In addition to core infrastructure, we also need to set up industrial and logistics hubs. We want to create such hubs in the town of Labutnangi and in Gorchakov. And also we are considering Noyabrsk for this purpose. These places will be used as platforms for oil service and gas service companies, for construction companies. This will reduce construction costs in our region. All Arctic territories have a number of special features. We very much depend on the current economic cycle. So we need to find replacement jobs for gas and oil workers, get them involved in the construction business if in case they're laid off, etc. We plan to develop our consumer market, support small businesses in the service industry, like the food industry, retail, construction. Also, we want to develop tourism around Salihard. This will create better recreational opportunities for local residents, support local demand, so people can not just work here, but also have a nice holiday. Now, a few words about the environment. Our strategy emphasizes the need to limit pollution, and it includes a number of safety measures, monitoring, and emergency response to man-made disasters. We need to restore the fish population, other bioresources in our region, especially because this is the foundation of traditional economic practices of local indigenous peoples. Our situation is also special because we have two economies living side by side. One, economic activities of the indigenous peoples, and another one, modern industrial production. So supporting and preserving the traditional activities of the indigenous peoples is one of the priorities in our strategy. Our strategy is comprehensive. It involves both economic and social issues, and we have a number of indicators for various activities. We plan to achieve the following benchmarks by 2035. Our gross regional product will grow by 30%, gas production will grow by 40%, and natural the share of processed natural gas will quadruple. The volume of cargo transported along the Northern Sea route will also almost quadruple. This will make Yamal the flagship of economic development in Russia's Arctic zone.
That is essentially all I have. Thank you very much. Well, thank you to all presenters. There are formal things and there are informal things that are often very essential. Now let us open the floor for questions. Yes, please. I am a student at the Higher School of Economics, and I have two questions for the panelists. One has to do with the latitudinal Northern Railway Part 2. What is going on with that? As far as I know, RZD or Russian Railways has offered 70 million that should be spent on that project. Also, I wonder what is going on in the context of oil refineries construction. I realize that oil refineries are very expensive to build. Are they really viable in this region? Who do you want to ask? Well, actually, Mr. Grabarev, would you please try to answer this? Well, we have two projects, the Northern Latitudinal Railway that has been supported by the president, so we have to do this. As of the second block, we are thinking about doing that too. We are still reviewing the viability of the plan. Of course, we want to have these two railways to be built simultaneously or at the same time. The traffic will be there for this Northern Latitudinal Railway, and the continuation that will take this railway all the way to the Northern Sea route ports would be a very good addition. So the government is working very hard on these plans. Now, there was a question about digitization, digitization of oil refineries, digitization of oil facilities in the Arctic. Are you making any progress there? Well, let me talk for our autonomous area, Yamal Nenets autonomous area, and my colleague will give you a higher level view of all of the Arctic. Well, Gazprom Neft is the leading company. They have a lot of exploration and drilling operation. I know that they're flying a lot of drones. They are testing driverless trucks. I know that they are very active in this field, and digital technologies are used very extensively. We know that universities are offering training in various aspects of digital technologies. So that's what we see. Those programs, those IT programs are extremely popular. Digitization in exploration is very serious. We have a question from Ekaterina Sirova. It came online. What is the role of creative economy in the development of the Arctic? Please unmute. Well, so far it's not been playing a big role. The Arctic has really narrow band of opportunities. it only makes sense to do a few things. Either you produce raw materials or you do something that can be consumed locally. The submarines, those big ships, they are consumed locally because they would be too expensive to bring it from somewhere else. Well, I started my presentation by saying that there are few people in the Arctic, and that limits opportunities for creative economy. We have a lot of young people in this room, so you will understand. The demand is limited, and that is a serious trouble for the economy. However, this demand is unique in its nature. For example, there are quite a few digital projects for indigenous peoples. We know that there are some uh, computer games that have been created based on the cultures of the indigenous people. We know of some cartoons that have been shot based on the fairy tales from this area. We know of some technologies associated with use of the local languages. And to do those kinds of things, of course, we need very smart IT people, very smart programmers. I can explain why this creative economy is not really taking off very fast here. Uh, in Russia, we have too much control from Moscow. Things are overly centralized, and it happens in every field. All main customers and all decision making takes place in Moscow. Moscow determines what should be done, and it's really not the case at small places, at locations. Uh, we have seen lockdown in the Arctic during the coronavirus. And when we were hit by the pandemic, it gave impetus to the development of local connectivity and availability of broadband internet. Before the pandemic, they didn't have this. Only when the trouble came, the government paid attention to the problem and very quickly solved the problem. This is a typical thing. There is a special attitude to the Arctic. We think about big projects, things that we can do to impress others, but we are not focused on the comfortable living in the region. We don't have small things that are essential for comfortable life. Look at the aerial electric lines. They are really a mess, and nobody cares about that. You can see wires hanging off poles everywhere, and that's not the way it should be. We could make the electrical systems much cleaner, but we have not been given instruction from Moscow to do that, and it's not happening. Creative economy is going to take off and really grow when local people realize that it makes sense, that it is viable, that they can do it. And they will do it according to their own test. It's not something that will come from Moscow or capital cities. Local governments, regional governments could become more proactive and do those kinds of things. That's a nice idea. I can relate to that. Indeed, we are at the point in time when living in the Arctic is uh, not for the chosen few, not for the courageous few. It's comfortable. Look at Solikar. This summer, we had a lot of maintenance and repair work. We have been fixing roads throughout the summer, even in faraway towns and even in small settlements. You can see a lot of this happening. They have been building a lot of playgrounds for children. They have been even putting in heated swings for children to use. Electrical systems, outlets that motorists could connect their cars to keep them warm. They may be a good idea. I'm a driver myself. I can relate to that too. We are improving. We see that electric cars are becoming more popular. If that trend continues, then having plugs available would become a lot more relevant. Hello, thank you very much for your presentations. I have a question for Mr. Grabarov. In the strategy, there's an indication of the strategy for production of oil and gas and environmental protection. So where is the balance? It's certainly relevant for all of the Arctic, not just for Yamal-Nenets Autonomous Area. This is a very appropriate question. When the strategy was developed, we were looking into this very closely. The main parameter, the main KPI, is the number of oil spills that have been eliminated in due time. There are very many remote sites. In the strategy, we have set a task. If there is a spill anywhere, a spill has to be eliminated within a prescribed amount of time. Prevention and remediation programs should be in place, and they should work. Natural resources and a few production companies have a green agenda. They generate waste, and they have a lot of waste treatment programs. They use the latest technologies. They are producing blue hydrogen, and they are very focused on the environmental agenda. We live here. We realize that companies generate waste and they need to be properly managed. There are all sorts of sorting facilities for wastes. They are looking at ways of recycling. In small places, you cannot build a big incinerator. So they accumulate those wastes in certain areas and they remove them from the area to process those wastes in other parts of the region. There are very many plans to address this environmental concern and do proper recycling of wastes. Your question? I also have a question for Mr. Grabarov. I want to follow up on the environmental theme. You were saying that one of the main challenges that you're faced with is climate change. To what extent oil and gas industry is involved in doing this work? This permafrost thawing and associated land settling problems. What is this industry doing in that respect? We know that companies look into those risks and they take them into account. They build a lot of infrastructure and they have to use appropriate construction technologies to account for possible ground depressions. That is a must. They have to follow certain construction standards. Whatever they build, whatever they commission, they have to address the risk of ground sagging. The general trend is such that there is going to be more soil subsidence. We have a lot of ground monitoring efforts. We know that temperatures are measured continuously, and in some areas they put refrigerators that freeze soil that buildings are sitting on to make sure that buildings should be safe. Next question. I'm Daniel, and I have two questions. One has to do with money, and the other has to do with the human capital. Question one, how do you raise foreign investment for the Arctic region? Do you count on ASEAN countries, India, China, or do we only count on our own resources? When we try to do everything ourselves, it's not always working very well. I can refer to some of the latest data published by the Central Bank of Russia. The outflow of private capital from Russia amounted to 59 billion US dollars. That's 50% more compared to the same period last year. The second question, like I said, it has to do with the human capital. What kind of situation with migration do you see in the region? I read that the government is trying to bring in migrants into the region. One example, there has been an agreement signed with one post-Soviet republic. About 1,500 migrants were brought in to participate in construction of Vostochny launch base. Well, that has been several questions in one. Who wants to take a try? The one about the money. Alexander, please. For investment part of your question, it's not really an economic question, it's a political question. As long as our international relations stay at a low point, I'm talking about the relations with the West, with the United States, I think we cannot really count on investment from Western countries. It's a political thing. Even if there is a valuable project, it's still not going to attract investors. We see different types of problems, different types of crises. We have a healthcare crisis, with the pandemic, we have an economic situation. Uh, Oil and gas business is profitable. However, we don't see investors with billions of dollars coming in. I guess that answers your question. Thank you. Migrants, labor migrants. In Yamal-Nenetsk Autonomous Area, we always had a shortage of labor. We have about 100,000 workers that come from other regions. That is standard practice. Most of those people live in special settlements built near industrial companies. In one of the presentations, we heard that a lot of the Arctic is really invisible. We don't see many factory settlements on the maps of the Arctic. We need people to create comfortable environments. We need people for various emergency services. We need firefighters. We need healthcare workers. We need people in different trades and professions. What do we do in the region to attract people? We need managers, high quality managers in cities. We have a lot of natural resources. We have a lot of deposits. And to make it work, we need people. We plan to build a lot of housing so that people can live comfortably. And that would help companies to attract people to work for them. Housing is a very important problem in the north of our country. We have many residential buildings in the region that were built in the Soviet time, and they are not in the best shape. Many people need to be resettled. They need to move to newer houses to live comfortably. I think that this is one of the areas where we should focus. Thank you. More questions? I have a question for Alexander Schimberg and Nadezhda Zametina. You said that transport is very important for the Arctic cities, and you mentioned some challenges in this domain. What kind of transport corridor scenarios we are going to see all the way to 2030? The development of transport is very well described in the strategy. This is a publicly available document. You can check it out. We see a lot about the development of the Northern Sea route. This is not just another sea route out there. This is a big area, and ships can go further away from the shores or get closer to the shores. This is a big corridor. There is a big need for hydrographical surveys. To have regular operations there, we need emergency services to be available. Transit traffic in northern sea route may not be immediately viable. Maybe by 2050, it will be much more comfortable and it will be much more viable. I think most of the transport projects are linked to the Northern Sea Route one way or another. This plans to build railways, the so-called Northern Latitudinal Railways. They have to do with the Northern Sea Route. They plan to build new bridges. Again, they are looking at possible sources of funding. They are looking at the possibility of using private investment because the government would like that. In the Murmansk area, we have a large transportation hub. Coal transshipment is very big volume business there. Nobody could predict the situation that we're witnessing now with extra strong demand for coal. The Western world was trying to reduce its dependence on hydrocarbons, and people stopped using coal all over the place. But this year, because of the current situation, very many countries have to go back to use of coal for power generation, and that caused very strong demand. We hope that we will see more railways, more ports. Today, there are plans to build new ports, and there are areas that have sufficient depth for big ships to come in. There will be excellent possibilities for transshipment. But again, you have to have the cargoes, you have to have the freight that will make projects viable. The bridge over Lena is another important project. Tixi, or if a place near Tixi, may see several construction projects. They have several environmental problems. In the Soviet time, several old ships were sunk there, and that limits access to that port area. So it may make sense to build another port rather than clean up that water body and lift and remove all those sunken ships. Of course, they have all sorts of plans to improve logistics in the region. So this is kind of the big picture. Thank you very much. Uh, this is a pretty complete overview of the situation today. In the future, if we see continued climate change, if climate becomes warmer, if we see further degradation of permafrost in a circumpolar area, we may see open water, which is going to open new opportunities for shipping. And that means that instead of the Northern Sea route, we are going to have a shipping area for international traffic. That would be a threat to the Northern Sea route because traffic could go around the Northern Sea route closer to the North Pole. As of the railways, I can generally tell you this. Railways are built quickly when they support large bases of natural resources. A railway to Murmansk was built during World War I. They were using manual labor to do that. The railway to Klondike was built in 3 years in very rough terrain in the mountains. It only took a few years to build that. Trans-Siberian Main Line was built very quickly. This distance to Chita took a very short time to build. And again, this was manual labor, very different technologies from what's available today. The railway to Nowy Urengoy was built very quickly. If it's viable, these projects can fly. We have to look at the life cycles of large areas where natural resources are produced. If the resource base is big, railways will be built very quickly. Today, we see a lot of new ports being built. Sabata is one example. Maybe we're going to have a big coal production site in Taimyr. Rosneft is also planning to build a seaport to uh, ship its oil, and that probably is going to uh, account for the large share of traffic in the Northern Sea route. We have some work done on the Northern Latitudinal Railway, and that is going to address many transportation needs. Further developments would require a lot more investment. It's always been a big wish to have a connection of the railways to the Northern Sea route. We always wanted that. There has been one uh, segment that was built a while ago, but it's not being used now. Now we are having plans to build the railway to the port of Indiga. I am somewhat skeptical about this. If we were to build this, if uh, we had a new area of production of natural resources, which is not likely to happen, I think all that should be looked at in the context of the life cycle of natural resources production.
Let me add a few words. One problem that's always ports are not able to generate cargo by themselves. So you have to have cargo for the port to be operating effectively. And again, mics don't work on the other side of the table. You're right about the north latitudinal route. It will require additional construction works in order to launch that railroad connecting it to the Northern Sea route. On Yamburg, there is a line serviced by Gazprom Neft. So potentially, we could do that at Yamburg, but it would be better if we do this at Sabeta. The thing is, the Bovanenkova Railroad reaches the port of Sabeta. It's just a matter of 115 kilometers. So this project is more viable than the other one. Your question? No, they don't work. We had the same problem yesterday. I have a question for Nadezhda. If we look at all the total list of all the settlements in Russia, about 90% of them are villages or settlements or small towns. Could you please tell us very briefly about the situation in over there? Yes, this is a very good question. And again, this goes back to the fundamental problem with our development of the Arctic. Russian Arctic is special because we have major cities there. Nobody else has big cities like that, like Murmansk or Arkhangelsk. I think it's the same. It's at the same level as St. Petersburg, at the same latitude. So in the West, it's 10 or 20,000 at the most. When I was young student, I was working in the city of Muravlenko, and I was trying to find a foreign city that would be similar to Muravlenko, and I was not able to find one. They don't have cities like that. The problem with the Russian cities in the Arctic is they're too big for their purpose. Some say it's because of crazy Bolsheviks. It was not because of crazy Bolsheviks. It's just a decision that was made at some point, and people were kind of sent there. They had to move there. It wasn't even planned. It was an accident in some cases. I know a historian who tells the story of how this city appeared in the first place. So now that they exist, we have to support them. We have to protect them. It's like the QWERTY effect, this keyboard layout, QWERTY, QWERTY. It's not convenient, but that's the one we have, so we have to keep working with it. It's the same with Arctic cities. We already have them, so there's not much we can do. We need to continue supporting them. Now, let me talk about small towns. Yes, there are some settlements. In other countries, the cutaway line is at 200. If the population is over 200, that's already a small town. Apart from northern Canada and Greenland, about 40% of their population is urban. Anyway, I'm sure that Arctic towns should be primarily about governance, science, producing personnel, high-skilled managers for mining companies, but we don't need as many of them. So probably our cities will contract. They won't disappear. Absolutely. Some people criticize Vorkuta, but it's still much better to some other cities I've seen. Vorkuta has a lot of resources, creative resources, researchers, small business, etc. And actually, Vorkuta is the logistics base for Yamalo-Nenetsk development efforts. That's where winter roads start going to the Nenets district. They all start from Vorkuta. It's not just a coal industry center. So the population of Arctic cities won't be able to stay at the current level. The cities will contract. That's number one. Number two, they will not disappear. They will continue, but small towns and smaller villages mean lower quality of life. These are small markets, they're remote. I remember visiting some settlement in northern Canada. People there are bored, they have nothing to do. If you go to an old town, they may have a cinema, a theater, like Magadan has its drama theater. But if cities have to contract restaurants, pizzerias, will disappear because the market is too small. Uh, so on the one hand, with modern technology, you don't need big cities in the Arctic. Smaller city would be perfect. It's more than enough. It covers all your needs in the Arctic. But you can't create the necessary level of comfort in cities like that. Yes, they also can be used as logistics centers. They can be used to support indigenous peoples. But the smaller the town is, the more difficult it is to maintain the level of comfort that is necessary. All right. I suggest we stop discussion at this point because we only got 20 minutes left for tea and coffee. So how about we take all the remaining questions offline? And one more point. When we talked about small and medium-sized businesses in the Arctic, my colleagues from Yakutsk, they said we only have one person who owns a small business, just one in our entire region. So this is something that needs development. Let's thank our speakers. This was a very interesting discussion. And in our next session, we'll talk about transport, which is a nice segue. Thank you.
Recording stopped.